That same role that I had where I was laid off. Now, thankfully, this was a good number of years ago. And I have to admit, my confidence wasn't there and I just wasn't good at the job. I just wasn't good at it. So today I wanted to talk about the biggest lessons that I learned from being laid off. So the first lesson that I learned when I was laid off, it identified areas of weaknesses for myself. So what that meant to me was I was able to really critically analyze my own performance and think, what did I do wrong? Why did this role not actually work out for me? So if you're able to identify those weaknesses, then you're able to put yourself in a position where you can work on those areas and strengthen those areas in order for them to no longer be weaknesses, but to really be an asset to you. For example, for me, one of the main reasons why I got laid off from that particular role was because of confidence, my confidence to speak, my confidence to participate, things like that. If you're always quiet and you'll say nothing in meetings, but you're actually in a role where your opinion and your voice and your skill sets are necessary, then that is going to cause issues. So use any opportunities of being laid off or being made redundant to identify any weaknesses so that you can propel them and build them into strengths. Another lesson is having the ability to actually identify your areas of strengths. So as well as your weaknesses, identifying your strengths is also important because, look, let's be real. If you've been laid off, it can affect your self-esteem at times and it can affect your confidence and how you feel about yourself and when you do apply for another role. So really identifying your strengths, like the fact that you were able to have an interview and successfully get a job as a result of having that interview, is a strength. You were able to convey yourself and sell yourself in a way where someone takes you up on an offer and accepts you for a role. So that alone is a strength. And identify other areas where you have a competitive edge over others. We all have individual skill sets and giftings of our own. So just because you've been laid off, please don't forget that there is still value in you that employers are going to want, that you can even build upon yourself to go into, another area, or perhaps you're identifying that your strength is actually in an area where this particular role or a role that you're in doesn't necessarily value, or it's not as important as another role. Another lesson is identifying what works for you. Now, there may be a particular culture of a company that just doesn't work for you. Are you someone that thrives more in a larger environment, or do you like the close-knit team type of environment? There's so much ways that we can really identify what works for us. And sometimes, yes, we do have to compromise, but other times we can have our non-negotiables. These are things that you need to identify so that when you are in your next role, then you have already identified what works for you and what doesn't. So if you're having conversations with the recruiter, you can soundly say, yes, I want to work for a larger organization. So really identify what works for you, what you don't like, and have those non-negotiables. It's not a bad thing to know what you like and what you don't like. It actually sets you apart and you're able to understand yourself more and be confident in your preferences. Another thing I learned was being able to handle situations with grace. Now, being laid off, it's not the nicest situation to be in, but to handle a situation with grace, even if you don't necessarily agree with it, is quite a skill in itself. And it shows humility. That same role that I had where I was laid off. Now, thankfully, this was a good number of years ago. And I have to admit, my confidence wasn't there and I just wasn't good at the job. I just wasn't good at it. And I remember having my meeting with my manager at the time and with the HR manager, and I had to give a handover. So I gave a verbal handover because it happened there on the spot. So I gave a verbal handover, and I told her that one of the situations I was in, a particular exhibition stand, she kind of got up and just walked out the room, and I was just like, okay. But despite the real uncomfortable situation, still having the grace to be polite and to not take it to offense and just know that, look, this is the situation, I have to now move on. So please do handle these situations with grace, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you are in the wrong and you might not like the repercussions of some of the mistakes that you made, like myself. And finally, a shut door is not the end of the road. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I was in events, right? So I worked within the events and exhibitions industry. That was the sector I chose at that time. Once I got laid off, from that particular role, I was like, right, I am done. I don't want to do events anymore. That I have no joy in it. I do not care for it. I was just done with exhibitions and events. And guess what? I then went into account management, which was the stepping stone to get me into project management. So my point is, just because you've been laid off, made redundant, you haven't hit your probation, it does not mean it's the end of the road for you. When I was in that situation, I was living by myself in a little studio flat, and I had to trust God that I was going to get a new role. And obviously I was doing a bit of a pivot as well from exhibitions, trying to get into project management. I ended up in account management, and then it just opened the door for me anyway. So just because the door's been shut, it does not mean it's the end of the road. One of my favorite scriptures is Proverbs 3 verses 5, which is trust in the Lord with your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So sometimes we don't always understand these situations at all. But if we have faith, and especially faith in God, then we know that these situations will bring about a greater purpose. So it's really important that you keep holding on and you keep that faith and you keep aiming for what you really want within your career. So whatever your situation, be at peace with knowing that there is always going to be an opportunity. It's not the end of the road. No matter how doom and gloom your situation might be or might feel like, whilst one role will say to you that you're not the right person, we don't want you to work for our company anymore, another role will accept you with open arms and say, yes, you are perfect for us. So please, rest assured that a closed door is not the end of the road. I hope that you found this video valuable. If you did, drop me a comment in the section below and let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in my next video. Goodbye.